Okay, everyone, welcome to a new format for the ELTA Live series of events. Today we have a workshop because it's a different format, not the 1 hour webinars we usually have, but we thought we start to organize workshops as well. So it will be two and a half, maybe less, maybe more, depending on your questions after each section. So today we thought we start with a workshop on how to get your brilliant idea into a product, and the product or build around the product, a company, and start to grow the company, sell the product, and so on, and all the intricacies you have, because I guess every one of you is thinking 10 times a day about leaving the hamster wheel of legal practice and start a company and become a legal tech entrepreneur. And there's a lot to think about and a lot to know, and usually those are things that not lawyers, or if you have a CDO, if you're lucky enough to have a CDO, also software developers, they don't know how to, or usually they don't know how to grow a company, how to market your product, how to look at product market fit, and so on. So there's a lot of stuff, nitty-gritty stuff you have to keep in mind, and it's always good to have somebody who has done it before. So we invited today Annabel Pemberton of Sparring and Jozef Maruscak of Sudolabs to tell you how to start your legal tech startup, or your startup in general, because they've done it more than 100 times. So they are really knowledgeable. They know where the pain points are, where to look at, and so on. So I think that will be very useful if you think to start a company. Even if you're not thinking actively to start a company, it's always good to know, because maybe that will drive to today's workshop, will drive you in the right direction to start a company. But it's always good to work for yourself. So over to you, Annabel, and Jos. We'll start with Jozef about more administrative strategic stuff. After his session we have a Q&A session, and then we go to Annabel about more legal stuff, also ending with a Q&A session. So enjoy it. I will switch off myself, and over to you, Jozef.
Hello everyone. Holger, thanks for the introduction. I'm just turning on the presentation, so bear with me for a second. I will share my screen now. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So if there are any questions in the chat that I miss, Holger, just let me know if possible.
Sure, will do.
Great. So hi everyone again. I will just quickly introduce myself, the company that I co-founded, and then I will jump straight into the workshop. We'll be talking about idea validation and prototyping. And those are, in my mind, the most important steps to do and to sort of check out every single time when you are thinking about starting a startup or building your own company. I think that in today's world, there's so much resources wasted on building tech and products that are never used. And I'm just going to give you a simple framework right now about that should help you sort of minimize the risks of running a startup, and just try to make sure as much as possible that your idea and your digital product will be successful. So just quickly about myself. I'm leading strategy in Sudolabs, which essentially means that I'm driving currently business strategy. I'm trying to sort of steer the company in the right direction. And I'm also leading business development in Sudolabs. I'm actually a Cambridge University graduate. I'm originally a lawyer, and already during my studies, I was sort of playing with technology, and we started some projects still as students. Then I was working on my startup, which was a legal tech startup, CourtQuant, full-time. We finished that at some point, and then I joined as a co-founder, Sudolabs. Essentially who we are and what we are doing. So I switched my career. I firstly thought I was going to be a commercial lawyer, and I ended up in tech and running a tech company. So it can be a great sort of example of how this can happen, and that it's actually possible. And I might give you a sort of few tips and frameworks about how to do it. Just a few words about Sudolabs. We are essentially an end-to-end product building company. End-to-end means that we are offering, generally speaking, two types of services. The first service is called product discovery, where we are helping innovative business ideas to being shaped into user-oriented digital products. What it means is that normally we are approached by clients, by startups that have fundraised, they are raised quite a lot of money, have some idea, and we are helping them make sure that their idea will be successful on the market, and especially their digital idea will be successful on the market, which includes validating with them whether they are solving the right user problem, which includes building low-code, no-code prototypes and releasing them on the market. So just to do all the steps you need to do before you start properly coding, and that's what also this session will be about. The second part of our offering is product delivery, where we have a team of 60 engineers now, that work very well together. Then we are able to deliver the software. So we're building mobile and web applications. We have been quite successful. We've been around for 4 years. The combined valuation of the products that we have built is definitely more than 1 billion now. We have worked on 50 plus projects so far. We grow around 200% a year, and most of the clients that we work with are based in the US, Silicon Valley. Some of them are based in the UK as well. And we are getting more and more active in both markets. In terms of projects that we have built, I'm just going to be quick, just a few mentions. For example, Panoramic is an interesting platform. It was a data analytics platform that was at the end of the day used by Sony Pictures, Lionsgate, and many other big players on the market. They raised 35 million on the technology we've been building with them, and they got acquired very quickly. Another interesting project might be The Expert. We are still leading their tech and product development. It's a marketplace for interior designers, so you can actually book a session with an interior designer, and the designer will then help you out with your current problem. Now we are their leader, as I said, in tech and product. The MVP that we built generated almost 2 million in revenues, and they have actually just raised Series A of 12 million as well. So there are quite a lot of projects that we work on. Maybe again, just a few honorable mentions. Those are our most recent clients, Voltri and Vareto, where we are also sort of the key tech partner. So there's quite a lot behind us. We've been lucky enough to work with amazing founders, Y Combinator founders mostly. So I've learned a lot as well. And I've tried to accumulate that knowledge into this, like a, let's say, short session about product validation. So we can start now. One thing I would like to say is that if you have any questions, just feel free to ask them during my, let's say, speech or workshop. But I'll also try to give you space in like particular parts of the workshop to sort of ask any questions you might have. But please just feel free to communicate as much as you want. So let's start. Now, I think that the problem of how to do, or one of the main reasons why products these days digital products are not very successful is because we think about them in a not very sort of useful or effective way. And also not only about the products, but also about how we approach building those products. So normally, typically, how most founders or people that do not have that much experience with building digital products think about building digital products is that we have some idea. Let's say in the legal tech space, it could be, let's try to predict legal case outcomes using technology. Then after that idea, we start building the solution, right? So we have some ideas, some assumptions, and we start right away building those solutions. We hire software engineers, or we are software engineers ourselves, so we can code that idea and put that idea into a product. And once we finish the solution or some part of it, we will then show it to our target users, which means we'll just release it on the market after the solution is done. Now that's a very linear approach to building the products. Other examples might be, I don't know, the market is full of them currently. Blockchain is currently very hot, so let's build some social site on a blockchain because there is no such thing yet. Or I don't know, a good example was maybe not in the software space necessarily, but when three-dimensional cinema was very popular, then there was quite a lot of TV producers that were building three-dimensional sort of TVs that were supporting the tech. They were not very successful at the end of the day. But this, generally speaking, there's a site called, for example, Killed by Google. There are thousands and thousands of products that are not very successful, and it's mostly because of this. So we have an idea, we jump into the solution, and just then we show it to the users. Now, the reason why this is not a very good approach is because we simply do not understand how complex the world is, and especially how complex the current tech world is. Digital products do not have one single way of being built. It's not like a math problem. It's not the same as algebra. You simply have 1 million ways how to build a product. And also, we have like hundreds of potential functionalities and the ways how the product could be built. So because there are so many ways how we can build a product, and because the current tech world, but also the current world is so incredibly complex, we, normally speaking, our initial idea is almost never right. And so as a result, what we should actually be doing, and the proper way of building the product and the methodology, is a little bit different. So what we should be doing, and that's coming from like recent years, there are certain like product and tech gurus like Eric Ries or Dan Olson. I highly recommend reading their books. What we should actually be doing is approach it this way. So we firstly need to identify some user problem or need, some opportunity on the market. After that, we need to analyze and sort of observe that opportunity. So we need to understand that problem or that opportunity very well. This is what we call a problem space. So we firstly need to really spend a lot of time dealing with the problem and with the idea. Only after we have done that, then we start, creating or ideate, brainstorm some solutions. And yeah, I will show you how to do it, but we start brainstorming some solutions. And only after we have understood the problem, we have come up with a few solutions, then what we start doing, we are still not building any technology in a sort of typical sense. Only then we start validating those solutions and those ideas. And only after those ideas are validated, we can start coding. And this whole workshop is actually about how to do the validation and experiments properly. So just to sort of summarize, it's not right to have an idea, then right away start coding that idea or building the product and only then show it to the users. But we firstly need to understand the problem properly. Then we need to come up with a few solutions and ideas, and then we somehow need to validate those ideas with the real users, with the end users. And that should be done before we actually start coding anything in a typical sort of sense. Are there any questions so far? Because I'll come in the, with the real life examples, etc. But if I'm just a question whether this makes sense so far. There are no questions, then I'll just move on. There's and we see it from the from our projects and all the experience we have, but it's also just the data shows it pretty well. The inconvenient truth is that, you know, at least half of our solution ideas are not going to work. And also it typically takes quite a lot of trying, and it takes several iterations to get the product right. So the most successful client, most of the most successful startups at this point, this age, really have been through several experiments, and they have really took their time to sort of validate their ideas properly. So we need to always have those 2 points in our mind when we are building a digital product. Now, it's also not only that half of our ideas are not going to work, but another important reason why, firstly, we need to validate everything before we start building the product is because typically, this is, for example, a typical seed stage in Central Europe, sort of a cost structure of a startup. Obviously, if the seed rounds can be higher in other geographies, but the cost structure will be very similar. The most sort of valuable and important resource, and the most expensive resource for your startup or for your company will be the delivery. So all the software engineers that are working there. And that is a very good other reason why we shouldn't employ those resources before we know what we are doing. Let's now maybe, I don't know, that'll be a great thing to discuss right now. So have you heard about this device called, I think it was called Smolt? Did anyone hear about this device? Well, probably not, but and the reason why we haven't heard about it's because it's a failed product. But there are like hundreds like that. I really suggest you just check the Killed by Google website. You know, there are plenty of products that have not succeeded, and this is a good example. So Smolt was a device that could learn how much salt you put on different dishes, and that's exactly a typical sort of, it worked, but nobody was buying it. The reason is because they haven't properly validated whether they're solving a real user problem or a real user need. So I think that everyone knows how much salt they should put on their dishes. And that's just like a very extreme example of what can happen when you don't do your job properly. Another example might be like, for example, a company called Zoom Pizza. Now they have raised like $500 million, if I'm not mistaken, like in hundreds of millions. The idea was that they are going to, you know, when you order food, somebody needs to firstly prepare it, and then there is a car that needs to, you know, get it and deliver it to you. So there is lost time and efficiency. And they told themselves that, well, we are going to first, you know, what we are going to do is we are going to solve that problem, and we are going to cut the time that is needed to get the food to you. So we'll build a car, and once once you order food, we'll actually prepare it while delivering it to you. Now, sort of maybe even a good idea. They wanted to revolutionize the food industry, but then they figured out that the cars on the road, it's, you know, there's so sort of infrequencies that are happening on the road. We need to somehow, you know, jump on the brakes. Then, yeah, you know, when you're driving on a highway or in big traffic, the whole sort of movement can be easily disturbed, and as a result, the final product didn't even look like pizza because their solution wasn't able to deal with those, you know, bumps on the road and all the problems that you can encounter while driving. So at the end of the day, those cars were parked on the parking lots, and there were delivery guys getting the pizza from the cars the same way as it was before. And again, now this is a little bit different example, but this startup failed because they they didn't validate properly whether they can actually build the solution that will work in real life on the road. And there are plenty examples like that, like less extreme examples like that we can see every day. Now, so the key message for today is that you really shouldn't develop anything that has not been validated with the real end users. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Are there any questions so far, or do you know about any other failed products? Failed digital products, let's say. Okay, if not, then let's jump. Let's go further. So there are 4 main risks when you are building any technology product. The first risk is called the value risk. That could be, the example. A good example of failing to validate the value risk is that smart dining solution device that we have seen. So the first question you need to ask yourself is whether this product is actually adding value to our users. And normally we add value to our users when we are solving a proper right user problem. Without that first sort of value added, no tech solution can be successful. Another risk is called a usability risk. So there are particular industries where your product will probably look differently in different industries. And the main question you need to ask yourself is whether the users are going to be able to interact with the product, whether the product is actually easily understandable for the users. For example, if you're building a product in the legal tech space, lawyers and especially partners of law firms, generally speaking, are not very tech savvy. The use of technology is not something that is part of the current legal industry, and as a result, you also need to you need to accommodate that fact into your product. They need to create a product. If it's for lawyers, then your product needs to be for lawyers in the sense that they are able to actually use that product and interact with the product. If you are building a product for older generations or for old people, it has to be probably less complex than the products that like current tech young generation is able to deal with. So that's another question you need to ask. The third risk is a feasibility risk. Now this is something that maybe the pizza car was a good example there. You need to ask yourself whether the solution you are trying to build is possible to be built given current technology and data and all the current tech world capabilities, and also the amount of resources that you have. This is very at the same time another blocker there. Might not even be that you can't build the tech, but that it's simply forbidden to build in the country, or it cannot work in the current regulatory system. So feasibility is about making sure that you're able to build the solution that you want to build. And the last risk, and that's I think true for not necessarily digital products, but for any business, the question is whether you are able to successfully compete on the market, whether your company can be financially viable, whether the solution can be profitable and you can sort of sell it and grow the company. I will not be dealing that much with viability, but I will mostly focus on value risk, usability risk, and feasibility risk. And I will now show you how to validate those risks. And then we will go through like 2 real life examples, real case studies where you can see it in practice how we did it. Is everything clear so far? No questions? Yeah. Okay. Okay, let's go. Let's go to the next slide then. We have a case study. So before we actually jump into different ways of validating the risks, let's maybe show you an example of how we did it in the real world. So there's one client that we have. It's called EasyTenda. It's a UK client, and it's an online marketplace where you can tender deals between bar owners and drink producers. What it means is that a bar owner can sort of create a tender. I need X amount of that type of alcohol, or I need Y amount of Coca-Cola, for example. So the bar owners create the tender, and the drink producers are then able to react to that tender and sort of place their offers, and then the owner of the bar can then choose the best offer. Until now, when you've created that solution for the client, the current way how it works in the UK is that you have a bar in the UK, and then you are normally approached by 2 or 3 salespeople from 2 or 3 different drink producers, and then I mean, essentially speaking, you'll hear 3 offers, and then you will choose. That's very ineffective, or that was the idea of our client, that it's very ineffective both for the bar owners and the drink producers, because bar owners do not have that many offers, and they do not have visibility on the market and to the market. And the drink producers also need to do quite a lot of effort to approach the bars. Well, still, even though their offer might be very good, they might not reach all of them. So this solution was supposed to make the whole bar tendering more effective. So that would be like just a quick intro, and then I will show you right now, like in a second, how we did it. But let's firstly look at what are the possible ways of validating each of those risks, and what are the tools or frameworks or methodologies of how to do it. Does anyone have any idea how we could maybe validate that our product or our idea is going to solve or really is a problem? If not, then let's look at it together. But so the question that we asked ourselves in that particular example is that again, like as I was saying, we went through all the risks. So the first value risk, we asked ourselves whether we are going to be able to bring value to our users. And that's the first step every single time when you're thinking about an idea. So you know about the possible, you need to firstly identify those risks. So the value risk here was that it was a completely new process of building, of tendering, and therefore we actually didn't know whether our assumptions were right. We didn't know whether really creating those tenders will attract several offers and more offers than before, and as a result there will be some competition, and the bars and bar owners will get a better deal. So we have to, that was the key to the solution, to the digital product to even work. If we really, in order for this to work, that the solution would have to bring more and better offers than the current process. Another risk was usability. As I was saying here, we didn't think this is actually any problem. The main risk was that, again, like bar owners are probably not that tech savvy user segment. So the question was, how to mitigate the risk. But the solution, was very simple that we were proposing. So it will not be that complex. We will only keep the functionality sort of simple, and we also will build only sort of a few functionalities in a good sort of user experience way, so that even ordinary people will be able to use it. As for feasibility, remember that's a question about whether we are actually able to build that product and whether there are no regulatory blockers. Here, in terms of feasibility, whether we are able to build the solution, we didn't think that there will be any problem. That's there was no sort of innovative technology, just a basic front end and back end to connect data. On the one side, you're creating a tender, on the other side, creating an offer, and you need to match it. So no AI, no deep tech, nothing that could go wrong. But another question, which was a little bit more risky in terms of feasibility, was the regulatory blocker. Because in the US, Canada, or Scandinavia, the such a solution will not be allowed by the state. We did then some research, and we realized that in the UK it will be okay, and that probably speaking, the current legislation will not change. As a result, we could build that solution. And in terms of viability, that's not even important here, but we believe that we can charge X% from the tendering result if we bring sort of Y value, amount of value. So these was the questions that we asked ourselves. Now, after you identify the risks and sort of analyze them, then you need to somehow prioritize, because what I want to say right now as well is that obviously there are 1 million questions that you need to solve before, for the startup to be successful. I'm not trying to say that you should spend like months validating the different risks. But the main key question is that you need to, try to minimize the risks as much as possible while still sort of moving forward and getting to the market. So you also need to prioritize all those possible risks and the questions that you want to solve. Normally speaking, the most important question you need to solve, and that's where most of the startups fail, is the value risk, and therefore whether you are actually solving the right user problem. So here we thought we were like, this is the first question we need to solve, and probably if we solve that question, we can move on with the solution. And the question was whether we are actually bringing value to the users, so whether the tendering process will be successful. So that's step 2. First one, identify risks, then prioritize. Step 3, now validation. And validation, and that's what this is about a very simple and low effort experiment to get a real market feedback for your main hypothesis. So what it means is that you really are trying to, again, not spend months validating something, but try to run experiments that are as simple as possible, as cheap as possible, and as low effort as possible to get some real market feedback for your solution. Are there any questions so far? Okay, even no questions in the chat?
No, not so far.
Okay, fine. So you need to run an experiment as quickly as possible, as cheaply as possible, and the experiment should show you and tell you a lot about the particular thing or hypothesis you are validating. Now, what are the different solutions? What are the different sort of ways how to validate different risks? Firstly, now, in terms of the value risk, there are several ways how to do it. I'm just giving you a few examples here to sort of get an idea about what the experiment could be. But does anyone or has anyone heard about functional prototypes? If not, I will definitely show you in a second. But we'll be talking about low-code, no-code platforms or ways how to build a very simple solution very quickly that you can release on the market and then get the feedback. But I'll show you in a real-life example what we did in EasyTenda. Another way how to validate the value risk is via fake door experiment. Again, I don't know if anyone heard about that. But essentially, it means that you build something that looks like a real product, but in reality, it's sort of just a teaser. Let's imagine, I don't know, a landing page that for a product that doesn't exist, so a website for a product that doesn't exist, or a fake button on the website that actually doesn't lead anywhere. And this allows you to attract attention, and you can also, get feedback about interest, about about the general interest and therefore a value of the product, and you can then tell the users that thanks very much for the interest. It was great. We are working on it. So a real example would be, imagine you're running an e-commerce business, so you're selling some stuff, and then you are thinking about integrating a new payment method, a new payment, for example, PayPal. Now, before you actually integrate that payment method, ideally speaking, you should ask yourself, will this feature bring value to my users? And if I don't know whether my users want to use PayPal as a payment method, then I can as well place a fake button on the website. So when the user is when the users are going through the checkout process and they want to pay, there is a possibility to pay via PayPal. However, once the user clicks on the PayPal as a payment solution or as a payment method, the website tells the user that, well, sorry, thanks very much for your interest. We are still building that feature. It will be out soon. Now, this way you can easily sort of measure how many or how much value you're adding to your users by measuring the interest they have on the particular feature. So there'll be an example, and it's pretty common for Amazon, for all the big companies to use that method to validate their added value. Another good method or framework would be the Wizard of Oz. Now, this is very similar to fake door or prototyping. It's a product that users can use, and it looks like a functional product, but in reality, there's quite a lot of manual work that is done behind the door, behind the curtains. So, for example, we were working on one Legaltech product, Parrot. The idea there was that they are going to, in a court, there are a lot of transcripts. Not transcripts, but there's quite a lot of set during the court. Now, what Parrot was doing is that they were trying to get the speech to text and actually provide the court and the lawyers and all the interested parties. I'm not going into their business model, but they were actually transcribing the speech to text. Now, when they were already on the market and they had quite a few clients, the clients were actually getting very good transcriptions, but it was no like innovative technology behind that. It was just like plenty of people like putting it down and essentially writing it by hand. And they were running that experiment very smartly, because they actually were able to see how many users they can attract and how much business potential there is and how much they're solving the problem of the courts and the lawyers before having to invest such an incredible amount of money to build that technology properly. The same can happen. I don't know, you're running again an e-commerce business, and then somebody buys something from you and you want to send them an invoice. Now, the invoice can be sent automatically, but there is also can be some person working for you that will be sending it to the customers. Now, it wouldn't be probably such a big deal to automate the invoicing, but still, you don't have to do it if you don't know whether your users actually need that solution. So functional prototypes, fake door, or Wizard of Oz are very good examples of how you can validate the value you are adding. Are there any questions? Okay. In terms of validating usability, this is, I think, a little bit simpler. So I don't know if you know tools like Figma, for example, but design prototype would be like a very simple sort of prototype that you can create with Figma. Other tools, you can create very sort of simple and clickable prototypes. So compared to functional prototypes, you have no real functionality there. You just have sort of frames, and it allows the users to try the flow of different pages and of different screens. This way, you can just check whether your users will be sort of how difficult it will be for your users to interact with the product. Wireframes is a very similar thing, except that you are sort of not even using a software for that, but just sort of sketching the screens and the user flow by yourself, I don't know, on a piece of paper and then showing it to somebody. And I'm not going to go into crowd testing, but essentially there are certain industries where your target group might be very hard to get to. So, for example, I don't know if you're building a digital product for, doctors with 10+ years experiments in some particular area, then probably it will be hard to get the real end users to test the solution with them. And as a result, you have agencies that will sort of provide that for you. Now, in terms of feasibility, again, like the question is whether you are whether your solution is possible to be built. Sorry, the best way how to validate it is simply by, like, again, sketching a technical prototype and get somebody very good in that particular technology to tell you whether it's feasible or not. There is no sort of magic there how to do it differently. And in terms of viability, there are particular ways such as A/B testing and like creating price elasticity curves, how to validate how much you can charge and whether you can charge at all for your particular solution. But I'll get to that a little bit later in my example. But just check those and it will give you a good idea about how to run the test that will tell you how much you can charge and whether you can charge. Are there any questions so far? If not, then we'll go directly into the solutions and real life examples. Okay, so let's now, so this was, so step one, again, you need to map the problem. Step two, you need to prioritize three, then you need to somehow find a way how to validate them. I'm getting back to the real life example I was talking about the easy tender solution. As I was saying, we wanted to make sure that online tendering will bring more and better offers than the current process. So how we did it? We built a functional prototype. Now, as I was saying, it's essentially functional prototype means that you build some very simple piece of technology that is able to demonstrate to your users and which allows you to get feedback from those users, sort of the main problem that you are solving. And there's so much tools out there. There's also like a whole movement of low-code, no-code tools. Now, low-code, no-code tools are tools that allow you to build a solution, and it's simple. It's a lot simpler than coding it. It takes a lot less time, and it's a lot cheaper as well. So, for example, we are normally, it depends really on the use case, and there are companies that are working with sort of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of users, and they're still based on the low-code, no-code tooling. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. It's just a great way to test your ideas. We are, at least for us, the best tool to use is Bubble. They've just raised 100 million for their Series A round, and we have the best experience with that. Now, what did we do? So to test that hypothesis, we were able to build a functional prototype in 3 to 5 days. Now, essentially, Bubble is a simple drag and drop editor. You can build an app that is online. It has a database, hosting. You can put there your domain. You can fine tune it from the marketing perspective. You can build an SEO even. So, and it does not really require any heavy engineering. So what we built, as you can see, again, for the prototype, it's not really that important how the product looks like. So the company didn't even have branding yet or logo. We just created something very quickly, very simple, to make sure that we are testing, what the product is doing and not necessarily how the product looks like. So we built, in 5 days, we built a fully fledged app. using the bubble. There was a landing page, simple landing page here. Then sort of you logged to your account. And then there was the simple functionality. So the bar owner could create a tender, the brand could create an offer, and that's it. So we were able to build actually a functional prototype in 5 days. And what we did afterwards was that we built it and approached 2 bar owners from the group of user research testers that we had. We gave them the app and we asked them to sort of recreate a similar tender as they did a few months ago, but in real life, not using this piece of technology. They did a gin tender online a few months ago, so it was a good sort of they did a gin tender, so it was a good sort of exercise for them. And we asked to recreate that tender via this product, the simplified prototype. So they created the tender, then we got the tender to 10 gin brands. We had 2 online tenders running. And actually at the end of the day, after the process, both bar owners got their offers and the contracts were done between the drink producers and the bar owners. As I was saying, we were trying to validate whether the bar owners will get a better price than before, and what will be the difference, and how many how many offers would come. And at the end of the day, it worked. So they got a lot more offers than before, and the price was also better as well. Now, if we didn't run that, we would never know how it would sort of perform. We were in 5 days, you are able to build something that would normally take you a month or 2. So you save a lot of resources, and it's very quick, it's very cheap. That's the best thing you can do to really somehow run the experiment, whether you are adding the value to your users before you actually start coding anything, and you can use Bubble to do that. Are there any questions? Good, if no questions, then I can go to a different example. So I'll show you the fake door approach. We have actually run a different experiment. So a client approached us. Sorry for it's very early in the morning still here. I'm in San Francisco currently. So the client approached us. Now, they were leading electricity and gas energy company in Central Europe, and they wanted to expand to other markets as well. Now, they understood that there is a potential of, a smart market, of the smart home proposition, the smart home market, where stuff that you have at home is, essentially digitalizing the way how you interact with your properties. So based on their research, it was clear that there was a business potential. The market was growing, there was a small market penetration. And our assignment was that we need to bring something that we need to think about a solution that will be selling well on the market. Now, what we did, we first of all, we started with the users, as you should always do that. So we did user interviews, 10 users max. When you are properly conducting user interviews, you don't need more than 10 users from the sort of same user persona. So we don't need more than 10 similar users. We talked about their main issues, main problems, main desires, what they want to improve in their lives, etc. And we ended up with like 11 main problem areas. Those are here. We still wanted to somehow filter them to get really the most important things. So we ran a quantitative research through the existing customers of the company, and we identified the most critical user problems, 4 of them. And based on them, we also suggested solutions, or we also suggested a solution or a few solutions. we knew that those solutions are feasible. We didn't know that much how would they look like, but we just wanted to make sure that before we actually start doing that and do the research and the R&D of the product, we know that we are focusing on the solution that is sort of most wanted. As a result, we have sort of created those four ideas. First one was sort of e-controller, so it was supposed to be a solution that will make sure that nothing is unnecessarily switched on while you are not at home. The second one was ETAP, so it would be some solution that would help you not to flood your neighbors and keep your flat dry, and make sure that nothing's going on, nothing's weird with the water is going on in your property. The third one was e-cottage. So this was a solution that should allow you to control, your weekend house. So some property where you just don't go that often, and to make sure that everything is okay there. And the last one, e-rent, was very similar, but the solution was supposed to, help you have your rented properties under control. Now, we knew that those were the sort of four key problem areas, the most desired things from the research, and we somehow wanted to validate which one is the one that we are going to focus on. So we created this fake door experiment. Now, again, we have essentially built 4 pages. Those pages are very, very simple. It took us 1 week to build 4 pages for one person. 1 week because, if you see for, e-controller and e-rent, etc., all of the pages are the same. They're just a different sort of color and different pictures there. Then what we did is that we started running marketing campaigns, ads, used, marketing tools, even on Facebook. But we spent in total around 2,000 euros here. And we let it run for 3 weeks, just because we had that sort of advice from the marketing team that we should at least run it for 3 weeks for sort of for the general traffic to sort of even out and not to sort of catch any irregularity on the market. So we did that. Now, again, it took us 1 week to build 4 pages, then 3 weeks to run the campaign. It could have been probably done earlier, and it cost us, I don't know, 2,000-3,000 euros. And what we were able to do is that we were able to generate an enormous amount of traffic, but also we could see the differences in the different solutions. So, we could see that the e-controller had the most website visitors, the most likes, the most Facebook shares. And we could also see that, and that's the fake door stuff. So fake door in this example were 2 things. One, the website that sort of was showing a product that didn't exist. But the second thing is that it was actually possible to check out and to sort of buy that product. Obviously, the website didn't allow the user to really buy the product, but because they were going through the checkout process, we kindly told them that, well, this solution is just being, sorry, I just somehow got my, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. It just showed that my headphones are connected for some reason. Yeah, so we are able to, I'm coming back to it. So we are able to generate a lot of traffic, but we could see the differences between different solutions. And we could also see how many people wanted to check out and actually buy the solution out of all the visitors that came to the website. And the e-controller was definitely the best solution, the best performing solution. We could also then, we also told the users that we are very happy about their interest and that we will provide the solution very soon, but it's not existing yet. It's all about communication at the end of the day. But again, in 4 weeks, very cheaply, we were able to save a lot of money and really make sure that or at least de-risk the solution. So make sure that the solution we are building is to the highest extent possible will be used. So that's it. Now there are other things, but out of that obviously experiment, you can then also somehow create the or make some plan about the viability of the solution, etc. But that's not the point. The point is that you can really validate things quickly and cheaply, but you need to do that. And that would be all from me. If you have any questions, if you're looking to build a product, if you need sort of the product discovery or delivery service, or if you just want to chat about today's sort of presentation or workshop, I'm very happy if you just send an email to me. I would be very happy. And I can put my email into chat. Perfect. Great, so if there are no questions, then I would maybe hand it to Annabel and Holger.
Okay, any questions to Jozef? Because Jozef has to leave now, and
hi Joseph, that's me, Marco. Hi, I'm sorry about I've joined quite late, unfortunately. My question was, is it possible, please, to check again the slides? Can you share them with the forum later on?
Yes, that's no problem at all. So I'll share the slides.
Thank you very much.
Perfect. So I'll hand it out to you, Holger.
Okay, thank you very much, and so probably get some rest. It's really early in the morning, and over to you, Annabel.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye so far, and just bye.
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 Bye. Great. So after Jozef was going through the more practical part of actually how you create your MVP, how you validate your idea, and really take it from just an idea to actually testing it, I will be going through the actual legal essentials and what you need to know for creating your Legaltech MVP and actually validating it. So just some background about me. I work at a boutique law firm called Sparring. We're an international law firm that only works with startups. We actually started in Bratislava, which is in Slovakia, and I work in our Prague office in the Czech Republic, but we also have an office in the US and have partners in the UK. So we were born out of a software development house, and we really identified this need to create a law firm that actually just serviced startups, because the needs of fast growing and dynamic companies is of course very different to companies that have been around for a long time, or on the other end, sole business owners. So we wanted to create something that was a bit unique from this respect. We also only work with technology startups. So we have a lot of different work around software contracts, for example. We work with crypto companies, fintech, space tech, health tech. So a lot of different innovative companies across the space. So my background, actually, I was working previously in a startup that was recently acquired and is now called Bloomreach. It's a data startup, and I was working there as their deputy DPO, deputy data protection officer. So I was working with banks and telcos on actually how they would use the product in their marketing automation, whether it was handling the personal data of their customers or a longer chain of data processing, so their clients, customers, for example. So in that position, I really grew a love for working inside a startup and that buzz of working with a startup. And from that, I joined Sparring to work with a number of different startups on an ongoing basis, because essentially we're in-house counsel across a number of different startups. I'm also a co-founder of Law School 2.0, which is an educational platform to help students and current lawyers to learn more about legal tech and how they can use technology in their practice as a lawyer. So in this presentation, I'll try to make sure that I'm considering it from both sides of the coin, both from when you're actually sitting there as a founder, thinking about getting your idea off the ground, but also bringing in the legal practicalities of what you just need to keep in mind so you don't get too carried away with your great idea, and make sure you just stay on the ground in that respect. So I think that's everything that I wanted to tell you about sparring and myself. So let's get into a bit more about the legalities behind actually creating your MVP and validating your idea. So actually, one more slide then. So in terms of actually the companies we work with from the perspective of legal tech, Jozef actually mentioned this company before, and that's Parrot. So Parrot is a legal tech startup that specifically, they actually help with depositions in the US. So this is what would normally be a court reporter's work in terms of they would write up the transcripts of what would actually be happening in the court. And we help them with their legalities. We also work with a legal tech startup called Trama, which helps streamline the process around the registration of trademarks. So they were actually born out of Sparring itself. We have a number of different spin-offs in the group that we're part of, but we do also support them with the work that we do. And as you can see here, we also work with a number of different technology startups as well. So today, what I'd like to cover and to also hear your involvement as well, to hear where your pain points are in terms of the ideas that you have, to actually build on what Jozef has already addressed, to look at that whole process of the validation and then the prototyping, and at the same time consider what are the legalities that you should consider along the way from the perspective of creating something a bit more technical. So in terms of the idea stage startup checklist, today I'm going to cover carrying out compliant market research, prototyping and not infringing upon IP, protecting what you actually create with IP later down the line, and then founders' relationships. So for example, if your idea is actually born out of a hackathon, how you can actually mitigate any trouble later down the line. What I won't be covering today, but of course is important to keep in mind for any long-term company, if your idea does become a company and then needs to be incorporated, you need to think about corporate setup, like different contracts with suppliers and other team members, getting ready for due diligence, especially if you're looking for investment, and potential litigation, because it can always happen. So the key element that I would like you to take away from this part of the workshop is that even the work that you're doing at an idea stage, even though the idea is very flexible, you should think about it in a way that any line of code that you're potentially involving in an idea stage or testing, any assets that you're using to actually test your idea, that could make it into the final working version of a company. So you should just keep that in mind when you're actually testing something. So let's get into it. So the first, sorry, actually, before I go forward, do you have any questions about what I will be covering, anything about sparring or myself? Okay, great. So the first stop is market research. So Jozef was going deeper into how you need to validate your idea, and especially looking at ideas that have failed because of the lack of market research around them. So from the legal perspective, I think a really amazing example of this, and you might remember it, it was Google Glass. So Google Glass essentially was a pair of glasses which you could use that would, at the time, felt very revolutionary. But when I found this photo online and added it to the deck, it feels very, very dated now. But essentially, it would connect to your phone and give you another view on top of what you could actually see in the world. And it was pulled by Google partially for data protection reasons. From the regulatory perspective, it was very hard to actually put in place, especially in the US with this fragmentation of data protection laws, but also for safety reasons. So for people when they were driving cars, if they had Google Glass, but they were actually trying to watch something on YouTube, it would be problematic. And then you also have the conflict of laws there as well, but also just people's general safety. So even though Google Glass was, of course, validated, it's created by Google and they do have these processes here, it was something that was not able to pass these tests that actually make it to mass market. And at the time, it was a real shame because it actually could have really led to a lot of innovation in this area and potentially products that would have not been so chunky and so much like this in this way. But potentially looking back, maybe if they'd done some more validation of the idea from the legal perspective, seeing what could be changed about the product to make sure it's roadworthy or privacy savvy with privacy by design built in, potentially this could have resulted in the downfall of Google Glass not happening. Another example is some of the technology that's used in smart cities. So what I mean by this is when you have a number of different cameras around a city and they're used to track the weather or the traffic, areas that are really congested, how they can actually change the road structure in the future to learn more about the city and actually how it can be changed to be better for people who are there. Again, this can lead to a number of different privacy issues, again, safety issues with how things are actually coordinated in the city. And there have been some cases with smart cities based on the individual startups and companies that have been involved that have failed. So one, due to like one startup or one element of that whole structure not being legally compliant or not meeting certain regulations can actually lead to the whole downfall of the whole project, which could lead to the improvement, if it had gone ahead, lead to the improvement of the whole city's well-being in their life. So it's still important, even though it can sometimes feel like the law is just something that you put on a piece of paper in terms of the contract and put it away. It can also have quite big implications on actually how you develop your product. So that's just like the practical examples to maybe think about as well. So one example that you should think about when you're actually validating your idea, and I wanted to touch upon this first because when you are really trying to speak to customers, it's very common to think, okay, I will create a Google form, for example, and send this out. So I immediately wanted to speak to you first about data protection. So with data protection in Europe, people's personal data is covered under Gdpr. So Gdpr applies to any personal data that you actually collect and process. And there's certain rules around how you actually process this personal information. So you should make sure that you're processing this with notice, you're processing this under set purposes that you're clearly indicating to the actual the customer that you're interviewing. It should be time limited, so you should indicate how long you're actually holding onto this data for. It should stay within Europe unless you specify otherwise and you have safeguards in place for the actual transfer of that data outside of Europe. Because of course, if you're relying on a processor like Google, then the data might be leaving Europe to a different data center. Or, and you should also process it by yourself, again, unless you actually specify that you're using a sub-processor or another processor, again, like Google. You also need to remember that different participants in your survey, they do have rights around their personal data. They can reach out to you at any time and they can request for the deletion of the data, access to the data, alteration. And it's important to make sure that you actually reply to these requests in a timely manner, especially when you're actually validating your idea, because when you're at such an early stage of validating, you are not protected by a corporate structure, you haven't incorporated yet. So if you are actually handling data in a non-compliant way, you can face being personally liable rather than being behind the company instead. Please also remember that data protection laws are not just in Europe, they're also in the US and globally. Every year there are more and more data protection laws popping up. In the US, for example, we have the Californian Consumer Privacy Act. There's also data protection laws in New York and other different states as well. And there's also laws that protect how you can actually communicate with people via via their phones or via email that prevents against you spamming people, which you could trigger if you send too many emails at once or too many emails to one person. So this is protected by the Can Spam Act. So to actually connect these to what you would be doing in practice in terms of the considerations you should take, when you're actually carrying out a survey, for example, and you're actually collecting and using personal data, it's important that you're indicating why you're actually collecting this personal data, how you will be processing it, indicating this all in a notice in the actual Google form or in whichever tool that you're using to actually collect this information, and providing notice of this in any other places that you're using to advertise the solution. Say, for example, you use Figma to actually build the wireframe. If you're then going to host that on a website somewhere, you should actually indicate on that website, if you're directly asking for feedback there, how this is actually being processed. So there's always notice at all times. When you're also validating your idea, you might be tempted, like I previously mentioned, to use mass emailing. And to do this, you might want to buy email lists. I would advise against buying email lists because you don't necessarily know the hygiene behind them, where the company you're buying from has actually attained the email lists, and it might be quite, you don't know when you actually email those people whether you're going to get a response of how do you have my email? I'm going to report you to the Data Protection Authority. So it can happen, and you just want to make sure that you're actually using emails that you actually have legitimately gained. But if you do decide to buy email lists on companies like MailChimp, for example, this is an option in their different subscriptions. Just make sure that you are checking their terms and conditions around how they've actually acquired those email lists. So you can make sure that if you do have any complaint, you can turn around and say, I actually acquired this from this company and they have this guarantee. So then at least they have your back from this perspective. If you're actually speaking to any end users and they provide you with direct feedback, and then you actually want to use this at a later stage, for example, quotes, and then you want to actually name that person or name any information that might identify them, again, it's important that you actually get the consent from that individual that you're happy to do that. It's quite an edge case, but I have seen it happen before, so it's just important to keep edge cases like this in mind when you're actually validating. And finally, if you're creating a website that's just going to be used in its beta stage and you just want to roll this out to a limited number of people, make sure that you include in any terms and conditions that there's a clear statement that this is a beta website and that you're still in the testing stages. So having this disclaimer that any data processed, of course, will be processed in a compliant way, but that the website is actually just for the testing purposes, and it might not be fully functional, and it might have some faults in it as well. Are there any questions at this stage around the legalities when validating your idea?
Just one, hi Annabel, this is Marco here. Just one question more about the disclaimer of liability. So you will just draft a standard disclaimer into the policy, or it's a separate document? Do you suggest to separate things, or?
No, it can be a clause directly in the policy itself. It's more about providing the notice that, just to make sure it's really clear that that's the testing version. When we've actually incorporated this in terms and conditions, for example, instead of referring just to the site, we've always put the testing site. So throughout, it's always referred to as that. So it's just very, very clear that this isn't the final functioning version. This is for the purposes of testing, and that users acknowledge that there might be some caveats that come with that, and there might be some unexpected results with using the site as well.
Sure.
Great. Any other questions? Okay, great. So after that first section, I'd like you to think of an area that you would like to innovate, and then think about what are some of the legal issues that would arise in a solution that could come from this area. So, for example, if you're thinking about healthcare as an area that you'd like to innovate, and a solution from this would be creating a company that would allow people to provide samples of their blood. What would be some of the legal issues that would come out of this? And I'll just give you 30 seconds, just have a think of this, because sometimes I think it's quite easy to jump to that final solution and think of all the amazing things around it. So the improvement in people's health, understanding better about our any diseases or any issues that we might face later down in life, and not taking a step back and thinking about the regulations around this as well. So I'll just give you 30 seconds to have a think about it. And then if anyone would like to share something from this afterwards, then they can feel free to do that. Okay, so does anyone have an area that they would like to share and some of the legal issues they thought of? Marco?
I jump in then. Yeah, I'm with some friends and colleagues of mine. We're trying to work a bit on finding solutions for privacy in the metaverse, although it's a kind of a complex area, and I'm not an expert at all. I just give it a try, and I try to understand what are the issues. So what we have found so far as struggles is we will never know as lawyers, even if we are tech savvy enough, what are the technical issues. So I'm probably jumping to conclusions, but this question reminds me of privacy by design. So if I don't know what the product is to a sufficient level of degree of knowledge, it's going to be hard to frame the legal issues properly. So yeah, if metaverse is improving and it's going to be shared and used more, it's going to be hard to understand, for example, how to manage data over there and metadata. So what it's within our reach and what somehow the software or the machine is doing by default without probably even knowing it, or just some people, a few people will know it, like who is managing and knows the software itself. I probably haven't been clear, but I think my main point to sum it up is it's very important to know which tool you're using as much as you can, and be aware that you may not know everything, and that's probably the main point of it.
Yes, no, definitely, and especially in an area like blockchain, the metaverse, crypto, these different very changing technologies, the regulation around it is changing very fast as well. So it's hard to even predict, and sometimes it is about like just predicting what will happen in the regulatory landscape, whether it is going to be possible, because also some of these solutions or some of these areas that can be innovated and the solutions, they're possible today, but they might not be possible in 2 years' time. And we've seen this in the crypto space, that's because there's a lack of clarity around how some parts of crypto are actually regulated, that it's possible to do some things in the area now, but we have to advise our clients that in 2 years' time, maybe it won't, if that proposal goes through and is interpreted in a particular way. But no, that thank you for sharing, Marco.
Right.
Anyone else? Okay, great. So let's move on to the prototype creation then. So what Jozef was going through was more looking at the different frameworks that you can use in actually creating a prototype and going from the actual validation and making sure there's a real problem to solve before actually jumping straight to the prototype. So going validation and then prototype. Whereas what I'd like to focus on is the tools that you're using, making sure that you actually are not giving away any of the IP by using that tool, that you're not suffering from vendor lock-in and you're not going to be stuck with using that tool in the future, and you're protecting your intellectual property in general. So again, just a very brief overview of intellectual property. So protection of your assets is important just to make sure that you don't have any of your rights infringed. It's very important when it gets to investment stages. And again, I know it's hard to think about this from the perspective of, I just have an idea, but IP is something connected to a company, but you never know. So it's important to make sure that you just have it in mind, even when you're testing an idea in the early stages. So it's important to actually register your IP as early as you can. Ideally, you actually do it at the idea stage because you're off the grid. No one knows about you yet. And when people know about you, then people can take advantage. They can register trademarks to make sure that they get there before you do. So actually taking advantage of registering trademarks, making sure you actually can register that trademark, not choosing a name that's already taken, for example. It's important to take these steps as early as you can. So yes, just having this mindset that even though you're testing your initial idea, this idea could become part of a final product. And it's important to make sure that you have IP over that whole product and you don't have a line of code somewhere that's actually assigned to a Fiverr freelancer that you used in your very early days when you're actually just testing your idea. So again, this is just the very basic types of intellectual property protection. I'm sure you're familiar with them, but just to go through them quickly. With copyright, you don't need to have registration. Copyright is for artistic works. It's for music, computer programs, and recordings. So it might pop up depending on what type of business you're looking to create and what your idea is. Just be careful that there are differentiations between jurisdictions. So it can differ depending on where your target market is, whether you're in the UK, Europe, or in the US. With trademarks, you actually need to register a trademark. So our partner company, Trauma, that's actually what they do. They do the whole registration process, and you actually file it. You need to check that there isn't an existing trademark in use already, so the application is needed. And finally, with patents, they're a lot more expensive than trademark registration, and it's more around processes and designs. But it could be important for you if your startup is more technical, especially if we're looking more towards legal tech. If you have a process, for example, around natural language processing, and you want to make sure that it's completely protected. This is also going to be defined by your geography, by where actually you want to have the protection. But I imagine a patent is really something that you would want to consider later down the line, and of course not at the idea stage, but it's important to have it in your head, even when you're actually validating something as well, thinking, okay, they already have the patent for this. Is it worth entering that market if it's going to be so competitive to get a patent to actually use that process, for example? So it's just important to keep these intellectual property ideas in mind. So then getting to the practicalities, when you're actually prototyping your idea, Jozef mentioned using tools like Figma, for example. Firstly, I just wanted to look at using graphic software, for example, because you might want to use graphic software like Canva to actually create a logo. Just for example, if you're actually testing your idea and you want to have a better sense of legitimacy around the idea you're actually testing, and you're sending it out through a Google form or another way online, but you just need to brand it a bit. So you might use a tool like Canva. You might just pay for 1 month subscription with Canva Pro. if you are going to be using any of Canva's Pro assets for commercial usage, there are different licenses that these are under. So it's just important that you actually check these individual licenses. So for example, this is an extract from one of the licenses actually on Canva's website. And for example, if you want to sell the designs you create on Canva, you can, but then you also can't. So what you can sell is if you actually take one of those pro assets and then create something new out of it. So you actually mix it with your own design and you make it your own. But you can't just take one of those assets, put it on a t-shirt. So just take one of those Canva Pro assets, use it as your whole logo, and then sell it, which you might accidentally end up doing if you just take one of those assets as your logo. And again, this might not feel like it's important when you're just testing the idea, but it's sometimes these ideas and these processes that you do at the testing phase that end up trickling through if you're successful and then make a business out of it that you forget about. So it's good to get into good habits as early as possible, and with things like Canva to actually read the licenses. On the flip side, with UX and UI tools, there's tools like Figma that Jozef mentioned. It's the same there. It's a little different because with Canva, there's actually these artistic elements that you're using, and that's really the whole point of Canva. Whereas with Figma, you're drawing lines, you're creating shapes. So you're less likely to run into intellectual property issues there. But just keep in mind that, of course, if you're taking any content from outside of Figma, like stock images, that you should also check their licenses as well. Then there's also tools that you can use that are no-code or low-code tools, such as Brighter, if we're speaking about Legaltech. So if you're directly wanting to build a Legaltech product that can be rolled out in a web app form, and you want to use a tool like Brighter, this is a really fast way of doing it, especially if you want to create something that's relying on decision trees and it's in a questionnaire format on the back end. The thing with using tools like Brighter is that you can then suffer from having vendor lock-in later down the line, because it can be quite expensive to then pay for the tool. So you should just, again, like consider this when you're actually building your idea initially, that decision might determine how you actually create and grow the product later. So it might be best just to stick to the free tools, like Jozef said, also with the tool Bubble that he mentioned, Figma and Canva, and then use a tool like Brighter, even though you might initially be attracted to it because it's very shiny, but use it when you've actually validated the idea and you perhaps have a bit of funding behind your idea. Any questions around this so far? Okay, great. So the next area when prototyping your idea is you might also be tempted to outsource it. So you might not actually want to create the prototype yourself, especially if you need to create an app or something a bit more complicated beyond a form. So of course, this is going beyond the stage that you would initially do with actually speaking to your customers, speaking to who would be your end users, and finding out whether there's actually a need for the product and for the solution, and actually creating something a bit more viable. Personally, when we first started with Law School 2.0, we were very it was hard to actually get it off the ground in terms of creating something that people would use, and we felt, do we need to invest money in a freelancer service to create an app, for example, or to create a website? And in the end, our website still runs on Wix because it's just the easiest way for us to update it and get it out there while we're also working our full-time jobs. And sometimes you just need to do hacks like this instead. But you might feel that you want to actually pay for freelancer services like Fiverr, where you can find a number of different services all in one place, and you can actually outsource those services to someone else. This can be fantastic for actually having a number of different processes going on at one time, being able to roll out your idea very fast, especially if you know there's competition coming. But when you're doing it, just make sure that you don't pay for something on the cheap, and don't look at the other services that freelancer offers. because typically what happens on Fiverr is that there'll be a service for £10 or €10, and then there'll be a service that is €100, and it will be the same service, but the €100 service will have the they will actually provide you with the IP. They will assign the IP to you, whereas the €10 service, they will keep the IP. And what this means is that if you ever want to actually commercialize any part of what has actually been created, you could run into serious legal trouble because you wouldn't actually own the IP of that whatever has actually been created for you. Especially if an app has been developed for you, €10 for an app is very, very affordable. So I imagine it would be more for the lower price and the higher price, but it's important to make sure that you do actually make sure that you do own the IP if you're using these freelancer services. This is also the case if you're using a software development house. Yojo is from a software development house. That's what Sudolabs is. And if you do work with a more established one, they are making sure that they actually completely transfer the IP to you, so you don't have vendor lock-in. But there are other software development houses out there that will just license part of the intellectual property to you, and they won't provide you with full ownership. And what that essentially means is that whenever you need to update the product or the app, you have to go back to them because they basically own part of your tool. So just be careful if you're using any other services to initially prototype your idea, sort of half prototype, half more serious product, that you don't accidentally give away part of your idea at a really early stage. And then the third area is when you're actually prototyping your idea in terms of the assets you're using. So if you're using an open source library, for example, if you are actually coding, then it's important to make sure that open source library actually has a license. So this is important to serve both contributors and users of an open source library. And essentially, if there's no license in the open source library, then there is no permission to use, modify, or share the software. So it's important to make sure that you check where you're getting in the actual open source library itself, whether they have an MIT license, for example, a general public license, and that you're actually protected by this. If you find an open source library that is missing a license and you still want to use any of the assets there, it's best to actually contact them and see if they can come up with a private license for you. And if the answer is no, then you should probably be skeptical and look elsewhere, because it's very unusual practice to not have this license. The reason why it's important is it allows you to actually use the work. And again, it makes sure that you can actually own the IP. I've probably mentioned this briefly, but the reason why it's important for you to own the IP is, again, later down the line, if you are looking to seek investment, then these are going to be the questions investors will ask you, whether you actually own the IP, because it connects to your company's value. And it's also important just to make sure that you don't have any takedown requests, because if you are using assets from an open source library that are actually not yours, then anytime that open source library can turn around to you and ask you to take things down, which you've put your hard work into. So it's just important to make this initial check when you're first starting. Any questions based on this part of the prototyping so far? No? Okay, great. And just actually a bit more information around using open source libraries. There's this website called choosealicense.com, and it provides a bit more information around this. It's a nice website because it has a nice balance between being technical, but not being too technical, but being technical enough with the information you need to know. So if you are a straight lawyer, for example, and you don't feel as technical in your practice, then this could be handy for you. And sorry, I will also share these slides as well, so you will have all the links that you can see out here. So now moving to hackathons and accelerators. So this wasn't actually mentioned by Jozo, but I wanted to mention it in my part of the workshop, because I think it's something that's important to discuss, because this is typically how a lot of ideas are either generated or they get off the ground, because typically people have a lot of ideas, but they need the support of others to actually get them moving. So with hackathons and accelerators, this is the perfect way to do it. But of course, like we've already discussed, it does come with legal hurdles that you just need to consider. So what, maybe just take 30 seconds again, just have a think about, at a hackathon, what legalities would you consider? And at an accelerator, what legalities would you consider? Okay, great. So in terms of the legalities for hackathons, they're quite similar to what we actually discussed today. The first one I will go into a little bit more in a moment. So actually having an agreement between your team on how you would actually use the idea that you're going to be creating. The data use when carrying out user research. So when you're actually gaining answers on surveys, like how is that data actually going to be used? Not copying other people's work, whether this is when you're actually creating a slide deck or an article based on actually the work that you've done in the hackathon, or any text that you're using on a mock-up website, not copying it from someone else's website and then publicly posting it somewhere. And just in general, avoiding unnecessary risks, because as I previously mentioned, you're not protected by a company, so you're just a sole person. And then in terms of the accelerators, some of the legalities that you should think about there, they're a little different, because the main difference between an accelerator and a hackathon is a hackathon would normally happen over like 48 hours or 72 hours. It's very short term. There's the buzz of the hackathon and creating that idea, and then actually creating a solution. And sometimes these solutions go forward and they turn into something bigger out of the hackathon. Whereas the accelerator, you're normally actually chosen to be there. You have an idea, and sometimes accelerators are more to find your co-founders or to get the idea off the ground. And with the accelerator, you have these different issues of, you might join the accelerator in exchange for equity, for example. So keeping that in mind, that there is this sort of bargaining power, that in order for you to get the connections to other co-founders and perhaps get the mentorship that's involved as part of the accelerator, you might be giving away part of something you're still yet to build and you don't actually know how big it will be. So look at accelerators and hackathons as tools to test your idea, but I would advise, and actually maybe this is more here, with hackathons in general, avoid them using to start your businesses. I was actually advised to test a business idea at a hackathon, and this was a few years ago for me now, and looking back, I'm really glad I didn't. It was actually at a hackathon where they advised us there were rules to the hackathon that you couldn't take a business idea there, because it would be unfair, of course, because you would have worked on it before. But from the legal perspective, it is also quite risky to do that, because you've only just met these people and you don't have any formal agreements between them. There's the question around who created what, and it can just get a bit complicated. It's better to take an idea and see that's in the same space as your business idea and see if that works. Maybe it would be the same end user, so you can use the hackathon to actually do the validation that Jozef went into, but it's a different product, for example, so you won't have the issues around IP that we discussed. However, sometimes you might have the situation where you go to a hackathon and you get a fantastic team, and that idea turns into something that could be a business. So in this sort of case, what is important to then keep in mind, especially after the first once you realize that this has actually happened after the hackathon, is to move from that hackathon sense of mindset where you're moving really fast within those 48, 72 hours and actually getting something in writing in place. So whether this is a shareholders agreement, actually agreeing what is actually going to be the cooperation between you as co-founders or partners together in this different business. Of course, you wouldn't be like shareholders yet because you don't actually have shares in anything, but it's more of a sort of gentleman's agreement between how you would actually use the idea and who can actually do what, whether, for example, one person can actually use this as their sole idea, or whether the whole group would have to take it forward. And it can be exactly what you would prefer as a team. And it would also need to be in writing to agree the ownership of the IP, because again, straight off the hackathon, you don't have an entity. IP needs to be attached to the entity. And it would be more about, I agree not to go and take this idea somewhere else and use it in a competing business, for example. So it's more based on concepts of trust, but having these written agreements in place once you do incorporate can be helpful for you as well. But it also can be helpful by using this sort of legal principle to actually just get the structure in place as early as possible to avoid having issues later down the line. And then I've briefly mentioned it, but with accelerators, just again, be careful of their terms. Make sure that you do look into what you're actually getting in return from an accelerator and what you need to give up to be there, because there might just be this, it might not be as favorable towards you as you might expect when you initially sign up. Any questions on this or anything else I've said so far? Okay. And was this in line with what your answer was to this, like which legalities you would consider at hackathons and accelerators, or were there any legalities that crossed your mind that I didn't mention? Because this is just a handful of some of the legalities. There are, of course, other things that you could also keep in mind as well. So I'd be interested in hearing.
Yeah, I can jump in. No, I haven't. No, what you show was not predictable for me. What I was thinking about was more like, I don't know why, probably that's my legal side, more like NDAs. So like ensuring, even though we are very early stages and it's an hackathon or an accelerator, between the parties involved, they need to sign an NDA. But that's just my standard approach to things. So I was thinking about NDAs. I don't know if does it work in practice? Does it happen? I don't think so.
Yeah, this is the thing, because especially at a hackathon itself, it's such a mood killer to get out an NDA.
No,
get
indeed,
your
you
team
don't.
to sign it in the beginning. So teams typically don't want to do it. And this is actually why there's normally lawyers at hackathons as well. So you can actually ask them questions as you go along, right? But with the NDA, the fact that typically they're very hard to enforce, I'm a bit skeptical about whether it would actually have the impact.
And it's probably not the best way to start a mutual collaboration. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
and that was why. Yeah, that was why I suggest. I thought the suggestion of this sort of more casual agreement, going more towards a shareholders agreement, is a better way to start, because then you can really make it what you want it to be, and then it's just in writing what your cooperation is, and you can refer back to it. So
makes sense.
Great. Okay. Anything else? Okay, then just to finish off then, if there's no more questions around the validation and the actual prototyping part of this workshop, then I'd just like to share with you at Sparring, we have something called the Sparring Playbook. And this is our sort of gift back to the community of trying to make legal advice more open source. That's our ultimate goal with Sparring Playbook. At the moment, it's just contributions mainly from our firm with some contributions from some of our Playbook partners, but it provides a overview of startup law that's suitable for founders and entrepreneurs who are just getting off the ground. And we always advise founders when they're first starting to look at our playbook first before starting any services with us, because typically they will find the answer there. And then when they actually really need a law firm, then they can work with us at that stage. So you can find answers around data protection, corporate documentation, different templates, investment rounds, all of these different documents there. And this is also available in English, Czech, and Slovak at sparring.playbook.io. Again, I will send out these slides, Holger, I imagine through email, right?
Yeah, that would be best.
Yes.
And I
Great.
will distribute it to the attendance. But I've just checked it, Sparring Playbook IO. Doesn't seem it goes to another domain. Let me try it again, just to check. Sparring.
I will check it. I'll make sure it's all okay before I go.
Playbook IO. Yeah, Playbook IO. It redirects to salespageflipper.com.
That is the wrong link thing.
Yeah, we can you can check it. Maybe it's not working anymore. We can send the link.
I'll make sure it's the right link when we send these out then. Great. So that's everything from me. Again, if you have any questions about what I've discussed today, then please feel free to just send me a message on LinkedIn or to send me an email at annabel@sparring.io. Either is fine for me. Last chance for any questions. Anything else?
Maybe just to add to the last section on hackathon. So you're totally right. Nobody thinking about NDAs and other legal stuff at a hackathon, but we had at the first Legaltech hackathon, we had at Moscow Legal Hackers, we actually the winners split out into two successful startups. So they got funded. Wow. and so on. So well, they were from one team, so that was more or less manageable afterwards. But if we had another at another hackathon, we had a team from 3 countries, and they had quite an interesting product, and they had interest, but they couldn't decide who's going to become the CEO. All people under 25. So that's probably the most pressing issue. Who will be the boss? So it fell apart. So that's something really you have to look into, and maybe not signing an NDA before you come up with an MVP, but think about it, and then at least do it on a napkin. For Christ's sake.
Yes. No, absolutely. Because actually, I believe 1 or 2 of our clients, their idea was initially from a hackathon. That idea isn't their business now, but that was how they met one another. So it can serve you in many ways, even whether it's just meeting other people or actually creating the business. I can see there's one message in chat.
No, I just posted
sorry.
to upcoming webinars if you're interested on totally different topics, but just to be aware.
Great.
So
okay, then I think
any more question, last chance. Of course, you can always reach out to Jozef or to Annabel with questions, but it's the best chance to do it now. But if there are not any more questions, I won't hold you up, especially Annabel. Thank you very much. Please give our thanks to Jozef, especially to him who started very early this morning to enlighten us. And I will get back to you with some feedback on email. But thank you very much for your time and your experience.
Thank you.
And your expertise.
Yes.
And thank you.
Of course, I hope it was helpful.
Thank you all for joining us.
Great. Thank
Bye,
you. Have a great
Bye.
evening. Bye.